Hello and welcome, it's Deborah from Attic Lane, and today we're going to have a look at the latest Simon Says stamp kit. So we start with the inspiration sheet, and then there are several different colours of cardstock. So there is a craft colour, pink, light pink, black and green and red. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 colours of cardstock. There are coordinating envelopes as well, so there are 5 envelopes. This is a pearlised finish. I hope it comes across on the camera because it's really quite pretty. There's the lollipop. There is a pink shimmer Delicata ink pad. And there's a very nice stamp set. This I like the lettering style on this, it's really nice. And there are block colour stamps, outside stamps, and some extra sentiments in the bottom. These, I don't know if you can see this, this says really like you, bunches love, adore, kisses, favourite Valentines are. There's lots of ways that you can coordinate those with the larger sentiments. Plus there's a little row of hearts and a little row of X's and O's. There are some puffy stickers. These have got gold just around the outside of these. And there are some smiling rainbows, and I like the hearts, very nice. There's beautiful Distress Dust glitter, and there is a good single. I'm always relieved when it's single-sided because then I don't have to make difficult choices. There's a whole range of papers in the kit. I like this as well. I always like when there's something a little bit different and contrasting on the top because I can use that in my cards. Some of these papers are very, very nice, very pretty, and everything coordinates together beautifully. And there are also some smaller elements that you can use as toppers on cards. That's always very helpful as well. Let's get started and make some cards from this kit. For our first card, I'm going to cut out a little square from the bottom of this sheet of paper. I'm also going to cut out the piece of additional paper from the top of this, and I'm going to cut either side of the little hole because that will help me make my panel larger. I'm going to take one of the envelopes and I'm going to use that as a backing paper. So I'm going to use that to mat my design, and I'm just cutting off the top of the fold of the envelope because that's wide enough for me to stick my elements down onto it. Using those pieces of extra paper top and bottom gives me the size and shape of panel that I want to fit on the front of my card. Now that that's glued onto the mat, I'm going to take another piece of paper with the hearts on it, and I'm going to cut out a couple of these hearts. I'm going to stick them onto my design, and then when they're stuck in place, I'm going to put that to one side and allow it to dry while I begin work on my craft base top folding card. I'm using a white Posca pen and I'm adding a lot of dots around the outside of this. I want to create a frame, and this is what my design will sit on top of. I'm adding some glossy accents to the top of my design, and as you can see it gives it a really nice shimmer and shine, and I want to add some dimension to this panel as well. So I'm using craft foam in black. I use this quite a lot for adding dimension. It's much cheaper than going through a whole load of foam pads, and you can cut it to the size and shape that you require. You can use glue on the reverse and just stick it onto your panel or onto your project as required. Now that that's got some dimension to it, I'm going to add glue onto the back of the foam, and I'm going to stick it into the centre of my card. My card is complete now, but I will be using the envelope again in the future so that it's not wasted. For my second card, I'm going to use the pink base, and I'm going to cut down a piece of white card so that it fits just inside that pink card, and I'm going to use the row of hearts to stamp onto my white card, and I'm going to create a background using the ink pad from the kit. I'm using my positioning tool to help me get the rows even. I'm starting in the middle, and then I'm going to move my card slightly down, and this was about 4/8 of an inch that I moved my cardstock each time before I stamped the row of hearts on it, and I'm inking up the row of hearts between each impression. You carry on doing this until you get to the top of your card, and then you reverse the process, so you start from the centre and this time you move your card up. I'm using the hearts from the stamp set and I'm using my Versamark ink. I'm stamping these out because I want to be able to cut them out and I need to see the shape of the image. That's why I'm just using my Versamark ink. That gives me a nice clean impression. I don't need to use any standard ink on this and then wait for it to dry before cutting. Now I've cut out the solid hearts, I'm going to use the outline of the heart shape to stamp inside the heart, and I'm going to put white embossing powder over the top of that, and then I'll heat set that so that it will be fixed in place. I'm using my positioning tool again, this time to help me position the greeting that I want to put on the front of my card. So I've just used my hearts as a guide so that I know roughly where on my card I want those to go, and that means that I know exactly where I need to stamp my sentiment, and I'm using black ink. I've stamped it a couple of times to give myself a really solid impression. Now I'm going to fix the hearts onto the front of my panel, so I'm using my crocodile just to put a punch a hole in the centre of both of those hearts, and I've got some twine. I'm going to thread both hearts onto the twine. I've cut out quite a lot of faffing around I did here, trying to decide exactly where I wanted to put my hearts. Now that I know where they're going to go, I'm attaching some foam tape to the reverse of the first one. This will give it some dimension, and I'm also going to make sure when I stick it down I keep the twine away from the foam. I don't want the twine to be stuck down with the heart. Here's a little bit more faffing going on while I decide where I want to position the second heart. And again I'm going to use some foam pads just to raise it up, and I'm going to keep the twine away from the foam so that it doesn't stick to the card. I want to be able to move the twine because I'm going to tie a little bow. My bow's complete, and all I need to do now is trim off the ends with my scissors. I'm going to assemble my card. I'm going to use wet glue to allow me to position my first panel. If I get it wrong, then I've got some wiggle room, and then I'll stick everything onto my pink base card. My card's complete. I began card 3 with a piece of black card, and I attached a piece of paper from the pack to the bottom of the card, and then I tied a black bow around the front and I sealed it on the reverse so that will hold my bow in position. I've stamped up one of the sentiments using my Versamark ink, and I'm going to use white embossing powder to cover this, and then I will heat set it. If you find there are little traces of embossing powder left over, use a little brush and just remove them very gently. This is the rest of the envelope that I used earlier on, and I'm going to use this as a matten layer again. So I'll stick the top of my panel onto the mat, the pink mat below, and then I'll stick everything onto a black top folding card. I want to add a little detail below the bow, so I'm taking some of the little hearts from the pack, inking them up in black, and I'm stamping them into the centre below the bow. And with that my card is finished. For card 4, I'm using one of my rectangular die cuts, and I'm cutting a rectangular panel from the front of the red top folding card. I'm also going to cut out a slightly smaller panel because this is what I'm going to put my sentiment on. I'm using Versamark ink to stamp up my sentiment. I'm going to stamp it onto my smaller piece of red card, and then I'm going to cover it with white embossing powder, and I will heat set that. I think white and red work really nicely on Valentine's cards. Now I want some hearts. I happen to have this little die which will give me the tiny hearts that I need. You could use a heart punch or any other punch that you have to create little tiny hearts. And I'm going to use my laminator technique that I showed you in some of my Christmas videos to create some interesting effects. And I must apologise, I do still have a slightly croaky voice. I've positioned my heart die cuts at the top of a laminator sheet of plastic, and to use up the bottom I'm adding some of the glitter that was included in the kit to the bottom of the the laminating envelope, because that way we get the most out of that one sheet that we can. I'm using the yellow piece of card to help me hold the sheet flat so that my hearts and the glitter don't move around. And now I'm putting it through my laminator. As it comes out, I'll try and hold it in such a way that the light isn't reflected back at you. It's quite difficult to show you this without blinding you because of the lighting. But I hope you can see that everything is locked and held in place, and that glitter looks fabulous. I've cut down the hearts, and I'm going to reserve the glitter for use in another panel, in another card later on. So this is how my finished card is going to look, and to assemble it I take a high instant tack tape glue and I go around the inside of my card, and then I can adhere my laminated panel to the inside of that. It makes a very, very clean inside to your card. I'll close it, I'll turn it around, and now I can simply add glue to the back of my little sentiment, and that will be stuck right in the centre of my card. It's very effective, it's very simple and very easy, and there are many different things that you could add inside a laminating pouch to hold them in place. On to card 5, and I'm using another of the envelopes. I do apologise if you're fond of those envelopes, but I thought the paper was so beautiful it had to be used more than just for an envelope. I've folded a little rectangle in half, and I've drawn a curved shape around the edge of it using one of my rolls of tape. And now I'm going to score 2/8 of an inch. Sorry, I'm not very good with the inches, the imperial. I'm better on centimetres. But I'm going to score evenly down my shape, and as you can see, I've done some concertina folding on it. If I now fold this in the middle and pinch the middle at the bottom to make it really take a shape, you can see it gives me a really nice heart shape. I've opened it out a little bit and put some yellow paper underneath to protect my mat while I go over one of the edges with my tape glue. I'll fold it together, I'll squeeze those two pieces of glued paper side by side together, and ta-da! We have a nice heart. I'm cutting a panel from one of the pieces of card in the paper pack. I'm going to cut this down to size, and then I'll stick it onto the front of a piece of black top folding card. I've chosen 3 of the block stamped words, and I'm going to use black ink to stamp them onto white card. Then I'm going to cut those out. I'm going to stick them onto my card to form the sentiment, and I'm going to stick them justified against the piece of paper that I've already stuck on the left of the card, and then the heart in the middle completes the card. For card 6, I'm using 2 different size square die cuts. I'm using the larger one to cut a panel from the glitter, and I'm using the smaller one to cut an aperture in a pink top folding card. I'm using the yellow underneath to protect my mat while I add some tape runner glue around the inside of my aperture, and I'm just making sure there's no glue stuck to the front of the card. Now I can position my square glitter panel on the inside. This gives an absolutely beautiful effect. I don't think the camera really does this justice, but you can see that the glitter panel is captured in the card. It's all very clean on the inside. I'm using one of my little puffy hearts to go right in the centre of the glitter. I'm going to make a sentiment at the bottom of the card using my Versamark ink. I'm not going to add any colour to this. I want it to be like a watermark. I want the glitter to be the thing that really stands out on this card. So I'm stamping up my sentiment in a very subtle way, and it says, "You are my favourite." That's our card complete. On to card 7. I loved this rose paper. I thought it was really pretty, and it was actually quite nice to take some time and just cut out the individual blossoms and blooms and leaves. I'm going to use these to create a little design at the bottom of a craft coloured top folding card. I'm taking some of the square elements from the paper that you can cut all of these little squares and rectangles from. I'm adding some dimension to some of the pieces with foam tape, and others I'm just sticking straight onto the card. These are all little messages that say "love you," "me and you forever," those sorts of things. I'm also adding some dimension to some of the roses. Again, some I'm sticking flat onto the card, and others I'm really raising them up and making a sort of a bouquet to capture those sentiments. The card isn't finished yet. We're going to use the white Posca pen again to put a lot of dots around this. I want to make the design really pop, so I'm adding a lot of dots closest to where they meet the design. It's very dense in there, and then there are fewer and fewer dots as I get further away from the design. It makes it really stand out and it makes it very pretty. This is a very useful technique if you feel the design you've made needs something else just to lift it. For card 8, I'm using a white top folding card as my base, and I'm going to use some black ink to stamp onto the reverse of one of the sheets of paper I've used from the paper pack. I'm going to stamp off a number of heart shapes because I'm going to cut these out and I'm going to use them to stick onto the front of my card. This is going to be a very simple, very quick little card. We've made some quite complex cards today, and this is just a nice way to make the most of that paper. This is one of my favourite papers in the whole pack. I thought it was beautiful. I'm sticking the hearts in the centre, in the middle of my card, and I've taken a brown pen and I'm going to go around the outside of my card and create a little frame. I'm putting hearts into the corner, and then I'll join those up using a wobbly line. This is a deliberately wobbly line because you're going to go around the card twice, and it's much nicer if you can get some variation in the line. I've also added one of the sentiments in brown that I've cut out from one of the paper sheets below my hearts. And that's the card finished. For my next card, again I'm using that beautiful paper. I'm going to use a technique that was really popular on one of the cards that I made in one of my Christmas videos. So I've cut a square of the spotty sort of teal greeny coloured paper, so it's slightly smaller than a craft top folding card base. I'm using my craft foam to add dimension, and I'm going to cut out a section of the craft foam because I'm going to create a little tunnel for some twine to sit in. I don't want twine to wrap around this and then add extra dimension. I want it to be captured within the card. I've got some burlap. This is a piece of sort of old ribbon that I had in my stash, and I'm going to stick that across the top of the card so that the middle of that sort of cut out trough piece where the twine is going to go will sit in the middle of this piece of burlap. Once I've cut this down, I'm going to make a little tag. I've already used some craft card to cut out a tag shape. I've selected one of the toppers from the paper kit. These are so useful. They just mean that you can make so many cards. And I'm going to glue that into the centre of my tag, and I'm going to rough up the edges of the tag just using the blades of my scissors. It does make a bit of a mess. Now I'm going to wrap some twine around my card, and you can see it's going to go into that little hollow that I've created. And once I've gone around a few times, I'm going to attach my tag, and then I'm going to tie a bow. I really like these colours together. I think that earthy burlap twine colour on top of the greeny teal is beautiful. I'm going to hold the tag in place just with a little spot of glue, and I'm taking some of the hearts that you may remember from a card earlier, some of the bigger hearts, and I've stuck those onto the front of my tag to give it more colour, and then I can stick everything onto my craft top folding card and my card is finished. For our final card, I'm going to use this really pretty paper to create an envelope. So I'm cutting it down roughly 3.5 inches by 3.5 inches, and I'm going to mark in the centre of the reverse of the paper a little cross that will help me align my folds to the right position. So I'm bending in one of the corners, and I'm going to slightly overlap the little line that I've drawn in the middle. So I'm folding in two sides, then I'll fold in the bottom piece. I'm going to put a fold across the top because that will help indicate that it's an envelope, and I'm also going to just remove my pencil line using my eraser just in case it sticks out when we've got the card finished. So there's our little envelope. It's not a functional envelope, therefore it's safe to stick everything down. We're not going to be popping things inside the envelope, they're going to be popping out of the envelope. Again, I'm using some of the toppers from one of the sheets, and I'm selecting the darker brown ones because I want the colours to be a nice contrast with the pink of the envelope. So they're now in the card. I'm going to fiddle around with the position until I'm happy with everything, and when I am happy with it, I'll glue them into place. There are lots of lovely sentiments popping out of the envelope, saying you and me forever, that sort of thing, and I'm using one of the puffy stickers again, just to add a little interest to my envelope. I'm using a piece of white waste card because I don't want to get ink on my mat, and I'm using the XOXOXO stamp and my Versamark ink again to create a sort of a watermark effect on my card, and I've gone over the edges, that's why I had to protect my mat. I'm using my same brown pen to create a frame on this card as well, and I'm going to do X's and O's in the corners, and I'm going to do little hearts elsewhere, and I'm going to join everything up with wobbly lines again, and I'm adding some little dots in each of the corners spreading into the centre of the card. This doesn't look very much as it is, but when the card is assembled it looks surprisingly more complex than it actually was to create. I'm going to bring in my little envelope, position it where I want on my card, and I'll glue it in place. So with that finished, I'm going to leave you with some close-ups of all the cards that we've made today, along with a little music. I'm going to say thank you very much for your time, for joining me today, and I hope we'll meet again soon.